Not a marketplace of ideas, it's a constitution. What's that all about? Why is it important? If you ask an American undergraduate, where do we get knowledge in a free society like ours, they're likely to say something like, well, the marketplace of ideas. This is an idea that dates back to the mid-19th century, the ideas of John Stuart Mill. The notion itself first arises in a dissenting opinion by Oliver Wendell Holmes in 1919. The ultimate good desired is better reached by free trade in ideas, and the best test of truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market. The notion here is that by competing with each other in this market, the truth will surface. This is a great concept. I love it. I have no problem with it. I use the metaphor of the marketplace of ideas in my own work. I'm not saying it's wrong, but what I want to say is that it turns out to be incomplete. A free and unstructured marketplace of ideas does not do the job. Why not? Well, first of all, humans' cognitive equipment is fundamentally flawed. And I'm not talking about some people. I'm not talking about deplorables or people with IQs of certain numbers. This applies to all of us. In fact, being smart in many ways makes it worse. We suffer from multiple biases, dozens, far more than can be listed here. These are biases in how we believe and how we perceive. And unfortunately, they don't cancel each other out. Unfortunately, they are actually additive. And here is the granddaddy of them all, the big one, confirmation bias. Raise your hand if you've heard of that. Most people know about confirmation bias. This is the very strong innate tendency to preferentially believe and preferentially perceive those things that match up with our preconceptions and our notions of our status in society. Everyone suffers from this. Being smart, as I say, just makes you better at rationalizing your biases. Confirmation bias interacts with another form of bias, and this form is social. It's called conformity bias. This one is a little less well known, but raise your hand if you recognize this diagram. Usually people do. There are 4 or 5 in the audience. Good for you. This is a vision test that was given to groups of 8 undergraduates by a researcher named Solomon Asch in 1951. 8 students in the room, and he says they're given a vision test, and he asked them all which line on the right is the same length as the target line on the left. Raise your hand if you think the answer is A. No one? Come on. Raise your hand if you think it's B. C. Okay, that's unanimity in the room. Now some of you will know this is a trick question. In that room, 7 people are actors. Only 1 is the experimental subject. 7 actors go down the line, one after another, before the actual subject is asked, and they all say B. And they say it confidently. They say, yeah, B. And this is after they've done a few runs where everyone gives the right answer. What do you think happens when the 8th person's turn comes? Here's your answer. In a third of trials, the experimental subject conforms with the group rather than picking the obviously correct choice. And if you think you wouldn't do that, 75% of people conform at least once in multiple trials. So don't be so sure. Solomon Asch's comment that we have found the tendency to conformity in our society so strong that reasonably intelligent and well-meaning young people are willing to call white black is a matter of concern. Yeah, you're darn right it's a matter of concern, especially when you realize how conformity bias and confirmation bias interact with each other. Because we seek confirmation of our biases, we seek out groups of people who share them, people like ourselves. Those groups, in turn, deepen our conformity bias. Thus, it's possible to go down deep rabbit holes of tribal misbelief. Entire societies can do that. Think of James Jones and Jonestown in a small group. Think of the Soviet Union. In a very large group, it becomes very difficult for people to get out of line. And remember, this influences not only what people say, but what they think, what they believe, and we'll come back to that. The result of these interactions is that in an unstructured marketplace of ideas, what you get looks more like this. Propaganda, hate speech, blarney, ignorance, hyperpartisanship, dogmatism, posturing, trolling, all of the outrageous behaviors that we see as people seek to attract attention to themselves or prove their loyalty to their affinity group and so forth. What do we do about this? This is an age-old problem. It's as old as the human species. How do we keep a society in touch with reality? The answer is these guys are not enough. You need this guy. So who knows who this is? Shout it out.
Madison.
James Madison, father of the Constitution, the greatest political genius I think who ever lived. Not by himself, of course, but Madison and his compatriots are the people who realize that this is not enough. A Declaration of Independence with broad principles establishing that we all have rights is fine as a general declaration of principles, but it almost immediately leads to the disintegration of the American Republic as the states begin fighting over navigation rights and issuing their own worthless currencies and suing each other and threatening conflict with each other. Very quickly, the founders realized you need one of these, a constitution. You need a set of rules that structure our interactions, and that word structure is the key. So, it turns out that the same insight is true in the epistemic world. You need a constitution of knowledge. Constitution of knowledge is not a metaphor, a simile, or a figure of speech, unlike marketplace of ideas. It's a real thing. These are actual rules. You can write them down. They are written down in places like the American Association of University Professors Red Book and the American Society of Professional Journalists Ethics Code and many other places. Actually has rules. And here's what it is. The rules, norms, and institutions that structure our public conversations so that they lead us toward truth and away from ignorance, conflict, and oppression. They are not the only rules. In fact, there are many other possible rules, but it turns out that this general set of rules is the only set that leads to the benefits that I'm about to describe. For a detailed analysis of the Constitution of Knowledge, what it says, what its precepts are, how it works, what's under the hood, buy the book. Even read the book, but definitely buy the book. But just bumper sticker level, these are some of the rules that both our constitutions have in common. No final say, they're open-ended. There's no last election, no last experiment, so no one can say, I'm the president forever. No one can say, I have the final truth. No one can question it. There's no personal authority. Both systems rely on impersonal rules, like voting. Anyone can vote, you get the same vote. Replication. Anyone should be able to perform the same experiment and get the same answer. If not, you have to try again. They both function based on consensus rather than coercion. If you want to pass a law or make a policy, you've got to compromise with other people. If you want to make knowledge, you're going to have to persuade people with very different views. Finally, they rely on checks and balances. This is Madison's genius. What do you do about the problem of ambition, which has destroyed so many democracies in the past? You don't try to suppress ambition. You pit ambition against ambition, as Madison tells us in The Federalist. Science works on the same principle. You can't get rid of bias, but I can see some of yours, you can see some of mine. You pit our biases against each other so we can spot each other's errors. We do that on a global scale. The result, a global network seeking knowledge by hunting for error, what I call, thank you Karl Rove, the reality-based community. What's the reality-based community? Well, now let's really have some rubber hit the road. First of all, it's science, academia, the research establishment, universities, the NIH, the Brookings Institution, the credentialing and scientific organizations and associations that figure out what standards are, the academic reviews and journals, all of those, and of course, this. This institution is a mighty pillar of knowledge. Its job is to make knowledge according to those rules and train subsequent generations in that system, in the Constitution of Knowledge. That's what they're here to learn. Pillar number 2, the law. The idea of a fact does not come from science. It predates science. It comes from medieval courts, which needed an account of facts in order to settle disputes. Who does the donkey actually belong to? What actually happened that night? Law becomes tyrannical unless grounded in fact. Juries are fact-finding institutions. Lawyers fill their brief with facts. Don't just take my word for it.
We follow the physical evidence. We follow the digital evidence. We follow the money. But most important, we follow the facts. Not an agenda or an assumption. The facts tell us where to go next.
Every assertion that Special Counsel Smith, Prosecutor Smith, excuse me, makes in court will have to be backed up by copious, exhaustive, multiply sourced detail. If not, terrible things can happen. Third, government agencies. Again, government becomes tyrannical if it's not based in fact. It simply makes up an account of the law. You committed a crime because I said you do, off to jail. That's how Russia works. Our system wards that off by filling the government at many levels with fact-finding and establishing organizations. I've shown just a few of them: intelligence agencies, Congressional Research Service, DOJ, the National, NOAA, the GAO, congressional hearings. I could go on for days. These things keep government anchored to truth. And finally, this is my world. This is a newsroom like the one that I started out in journalism. Well, mine was a lot smaller than that. But this is a hub where reporters and editors bring in information, vet it, try to understand what's worth tracking down, what's good enough to put into print, what isn't. Journalism, again, fact-seeking industry. Now, because this system is open-ended, because it's rules-based and doesn't rely on any particular person, it has a remarkable quality. It scales. Unlike any other epistemic community, say a tribe with its oracle or a religious group with its particular priest or leader, this becomes a gigantic international network of researchers and organizations around the world, journalists, trading, information, governments. All of these become nodes in a gigantic worldwide hive mind network. This is an actual diagram of the countries involved in collaborating on coronavirus-related articles by country 2020. And you see what's going on here. The density of this network, what does it look like? A brain. Think of this as a gigantic superhuman neural network that spans the planet. And here's the result. This is the number of research papers on COVID from January 2020 to April 2021. And you can see what happens. It goes from 0 in February to 130,000 plus over the course of a year. The result of the Constitution of Knowledge, of the reality-based community, as it builds, as it grows, as it brings in more countries and more minds, more young recruits like the ones here, is it creates the single most important technology that humans have. The one that has transformed our species from small groups of tribal dwellers who've learned almost nothing over the course of the first 200,000 years, to the species today which literally learns more new in any given morning than the species did in those first 200,000 years. What am I talking about? Objective knowledge. Objective knowledge. This is what the human species has learned so far. Lest you think of it as an abstraction, it's not. This is a photograph of it. If you drop objective knowledge on your foot, it's going to hurt. You might break a toe. Objective knowledge is a thing in itself. It exists independently of us. All humans could be wiped off the map, obliterated, and an alien civilization could land on our planet in 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 years and decode our libraries and our databases and immediately put that knowledge to work. And we know this because it actually happened. Stardate 5476.3, Dr. McCoy has an untreatable fatal illness, and the cure is found on the robot spacecraft of a dead civilization.
Captain, intelligence files from their banks contain the total knowledge of the Fabrini, ready for the people to consult when they arrive at their destination. And they seem to have amassed a great deal of medical knowledge.
Isn't that awesome? But if that does not convince you, try this. This is my husband, Michael, being vaccinated for COVID-19. Only a year after the virus was discovered, we had vaccines in people's arms. That vaccine was decoded, the genome, over the course of a weekend in January. The vaccine was designed over the course of another weekend, a couple of weeks later, and in people's arms in less than a year. No prior civilization has been able to do that, and no other system will ever be able to do that. That's what the Constitution of Knowledge can do. That's what we're defending.